The Obama administration's effort to reshape America's role in the world. Next on The Line. This is On the Line, and I'm Eric Felton. President Barack Obama came into office in 2009 expecting to remake U.S. foreign policy. That effort is the subject of a new book, The Obamians, The Struggle Inside the White House to Redefine American Power. The author, James Mann, is a longtime journalist who covered Washington for the Los Angeles Times. He's now author-in-residence at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I sat down with him to ask what worked for the Obama foreign policy team and what didn't. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Eric.
So, President Obama, just before he came into office, in a press conference in 2008 in December, said, "In this uncertain world, the time has come for a new beginning, a new dawn of American leadership to overcome the challenges of the 21st century." Did he have in mind just what he wanted to do at that point?
I think not, and the record of the last 3 years shows that there have been some twists and turns, that some of the things he thought he wanted to do, he found himself either unable to do or unwilling after he spent some time on the job. The best example of unable would be closing Guantanamo, because he did, within 48 hours after coming to the White House, sign an order that Guantanamo should be closed within a year, and
this wasn't just something that he did in a stack of papers. This was
right,
publicly made. This was a difficult thing for him to have to backtrack on later on.
Right. This was the signature piece of his first couple days in office, the thing that he wanted to be noticed the most, and which was noticed the most. And as his first year progressed, it turned out that he could not persuade Congress to do the things that he wanted them to do in order to close Guantanamo, specifically to have some sort of facilities to take prisoners from Guantanamo in the United States. Senators and members of Congress and local officials said, no, we have an expression in the United States, NIMBY, which stands for not in my backyard. And that seemed to be the attitude of Congress. And
this was at a time when Congress was held, both houses of Congress were held by the president's own party.
They were held by the president's own party, and to boot, Obama was at his peak of popularity in those first months, and yet still he was unable to do this.
Now, did the Obamians, as you term the Obama foreign policy hands, did they take anything away from that particular frustration?
I think that was one of a number of examples in which they learned that they were going to have to persuade Congress to do what they wanted to do. Now, the classic example of that is America's domestic policy, health care, and that was a battle that they thought could be settled within a few months, and it took well over a year, and then was frustrated in the courts, or delayed in the courts for a couple years. So all in all, Obama thought he was going to be more successful and popular enough to win his programs more than he was able to. Now, on foreign policy, there's an awful lot of things he can do without Congress, and so he was able to accomplish some things.
You say that if there was any one word that captures what the effort was here, it was a rebalancing. Where were there instances of trying to rebalance the American power?
Well, in the first place, they thought that the United States was overcommitted to these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and although Obama did, for a time, step up the war in Afghanistan, still, in the longer range, there was a rebalancing away from those wars. There's been a rebalancing or a pivot towards where they think America's main interests are, and commercial interests and other interests, which is in Asia. So there's been a rebalance geographically. There's been a rebalance in the amount of, in the hopes of the Obama administration, there's a rebalancing away from an over-reliance on military approaches and military power towards domestic rebuilding, towards economic diplomacy and diplomacy in general, rather than simply assertions of American power.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean trying to make nice everywhere, even if you're trying to step back the military footprint. Perhaps the signature military technology exploited by the Obama White House has been drone strikes. And how has that shaped the push for drone strikes? How has that shaped what kinds of policies the administration has been willing to entertain in which regions?
Well, the drone strikes, which are controversial on their own, fit in a certain way to the Obama administration's policies. In the first place, the Obama administration's first policies towards Afghanistan were based on a strategy of counterinsurgency. That is, bringing in more troops to develop better ties with the population at the grassroots. In caricature, it's having the Army build roads and dig wells and so on. And that is a military strategy. It has worked occasionally, and it seemed to work for the American military in the last years in Iraq. However, it is intensely costly in terms of number of people, budgets, and time. It takes years. The model counterinsurgency effort was the British in Malaya. It took over a decade, for example. And so they finally discovered that actually an approach of counterterrorism was proving to be more effective in dealing with Afghanistan and certainly with Al-Qaeda. And so in that sense, the drones enabled them to reduce their military footprint in Afghanistan. And in general, I think the drones have been a key element in Obama's own strategy and thinking, in that it enables him at once to target Al-Qaeda, but also not to put in a huge amount of resources into the conventional army.
Does it also allow an ability to sort of operate in places where, for whatever reason, maybe not just Army or other military resources, but also for diplomatic or other political reasons where you couldn't really get boots on the ground, you can operate in Yemen with drones in a way that you might be hard-pressed to put a large contingent of troops into?
That's exactly right. But it also has required some changes in thinking and doctrine by the administration. I mean, the fact that this administration was willing where its predecessors were unwilling to extend the drone operations to areas far away from Afghanistan and Pakistan, that's a conceptual leap. I mean, the original underlying rationale was that these drones were going to be used for policies of targeted killing in a war zone and in connection with the use of the United States Army on the ground in military conflict. So when, for the first time in 2009 and then 2010 increasingly, you have targeted killings that are often places like Yemen or Somalia, that's an extension, by 1,000 miles or more of the concept of a war zone.
One of the places that seems to have been an ongoing frustration for the administration is Iran. You title one of the chapters Iran, 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 picking up on a quote from an official expressing sort of how relentless this problem was for the administration. And yet there had been some expectation that before the administration came in, that President Obama believed he would be able to perhaps charm the government in Iran and resolve the problem one way or another?
Well, you know, this came up in the campaign, and Obama consistently said he would turn to a policy of trying to engage Iran in diplomacy as a way of persuading it to not pursue a nuclear weapons program. It's interesting because it actually was part of the debate, one of the debates between Hillary Clinton and Obama.
Who was the other main candidate for the Democratic nomination.
At the time, she was the leading candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. And a question came in from the audience at one of these debates: would you meet with the leaders of Iran and North Korea and I think Venezuela, Cuba was on the list, during your first year in office, unconditionally? And Obama said, yes, I will. And Clinton said, well, I don't think I would do that without knowing where talks were headed. Such a meeting could be used for propaganda purposes. Well, Obama took office, and in his first year, although any of these leaders would have been delighted to accept an invitation to come to Washington and talk unconditionally, Obama, and for good reasons, I think, the reasons that Hillary Clinton stated, did not carry through with this. He did, in the case of Iran, pursue quite actively the possibility of engagement and talks aimed at ending the nuclear program in his first year in office. And this came to a head. It's come to a head several times, but it came to a head in the fall of 2009 when the administration thought it had an agreement for Iran to take some of its nuclear materials or all of it out of the country. It fell through, and I think they were a little embittered, and then began to turn to a second track that had been there all along, which was a punitive track, which had to do with economic sanctions. Now, people inside his administration had really been working on that from the beginning, but after those first 9 months, they really began to turn to economic sanctions more and more, and that strategy is now culminating just now with intense economic sanctions against Iran, but international ones in a way that I think the Bush administration would not have been able to do.
Well, we're talking with James Mann, who's author of the new book, The Obamians, a look at the Obama foreign policy team and how it's shaped the policy of the U.S. over the last several years. Let's talk a little bit about the Arab Spring. But we do see a lot of, I guess you could call it, pragmatism in responding in different places, very different responses. So telling Mubarak that it was time to go, not the same message given to Saudi Arabia, in particular with regard to Saudi Arabia's action in Bahrain. And now we've seen the air campaign that was ultimately effective against Libya, but we see nothing like that in Syria. So is there any making sense of when and where U.S. power is applied, whether that power is actual military power or just kind of leverage and moral suasion, if you will?
Well, let me go back. In terms of Libya versus Syria, where the question is, will military power be applied? I think that they can rationalize that. They certainly have, in military terms. That is, it was an easier military operation in Libya, where you've got the opposition in the eastern part of the country, Gaddafi and his forces in the capital and to the west, and you can bring in air power and separate them. That's nothing simple, but that's clean compared to Syria, where everybody's all over the country. There's no way you can just draw that kind of line that they did between eastern and western Libya. And so that's really a military rationale, and it's not a moral rationale. I don't take the Obama team to be saying that there's a moral reason why to go into Libya and not Syria. It's justified only on military grounds. Now, the tougher question to me is the principal grounds. Why Egypt and not, say, Bahrain, for example? And they really, they have a hard time with consistency on those issues. They decided at the time of Egypt, Tunisia, and then Egypt, that it would be, that really as a matter of principle, they should not be standing in favor of an authoritarian leader and against democratic forces, that they really should be on the side of democratic forces. And then, as Mubarak is resigning, there are a bunch of internal reviews. It's kind of, what do we do now? Okay, what does this mean in other countries? And they settled on a very broad and vague principle that they would be in favor of reform, political reform. And political reform sounds like a nice, gentle word. What political reform meant to them was not revolution, because they were hearing from leaders in places like Jordan, certainly Bahrain, and above all Saudi Arabia. What are you doing? Does this mean you're opposed to us? And they had to come up with a rationale. So that the rationale was reform, and that was okay. It seemed to work in some places. It seemed to work in Jordan, where there were some political reforms. In Bahrain, they could not get around the fact that not only was Saudi Arabia, did Saudi Arabia have a strong interest there, but the United States also has a military presence there. And so they really kind of had to bend over backwards to not contradict themselves in Bahrain. In fact, I think they did end up with what amounts to a contradiction.
We only have a little bit of time left, but here we're approaching the end of the first term of the Obama presidency, and whether it is a second term of the Obama administration or a first term of a Mitt Romney administration, where is the next set of foreign policy advisors? What are they going to be looking at when they look at the Obama foreign policy record, and what are they going to want to be changing going forward? What are they going to learn from the last 3.5 years?
Well, there's several different issues there on whether it's a President Obama for a second term or President Mitt Romney for a first term. Most of the problems out there are going to be the same. Either one is going to immediately have to make some decisions about Iran and its nuclear program. I mean, that is a time-bound decision that is coming at some point. I mean, even to talk about when it's coming is a political issue.
And this is one where things that happen along the way, for example, the action against Libya, if anything, have given reason to places like Iran to pursue more aggressively its nuclear program, thinking that perhaps if you don't have nuclear weapons, you could end up like Gaddafi.
Exactly. I try to say that in the book, and the proof of that actually is that North Korea, I think, at one point said, "See, look what happened to Libya. That's why we don't give up our nuclear weapons program."
So, is there anything that you expect to be a part of the Obama legacy and foreign policy that future foreign policy people are going to say, we really want to rebalance from that in another direction?
Well, there are a couple parts to, if Obama were to leave office now, what would the legacy be? And how would it look in 20 years? Well, there are a couple of distinctive things. One would be those drones, for sure. I mean, it's a new military tactic. It's an entirely new military approach. Obama might not like to be remembered for that, but I think historians will find that extremely important. And secondly, along the same lines, the cyber attacks on Iran and its nuclear program will also be a distinguishing feature. That dates back somewhat to the late Bush years, but that's another distinguishing feature. And the third, considerably more to Obama's credit and Bush's discredit, is that Obama has managed to both reorient somewhat away from military power, but to getting cooperation from the rest of the world. So if these economic sanctions against Iran, which have crept up and up and up in severity, were to reach the point that Iran were to change its mind on its nuclear program, that would be a key element in Obama's legacy.
James Mann, author in residence at the School for Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, and author of the new book, The Obamians, about Obama's foreign policy. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Before we go, I'd like to invite you to send us your questions or comments. You can reach us through our website at voanews.com/ontheline. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you'll join us next week for On the Line.
Thank you.